Mary's evidence has brought this phase of the inquiry to an end, and it's time to reflect on what we've heard and what we have yet to hear. First, then, what we have heard. Many of those who've given evidence have thanked the inquiry and me for giving them the opportunity they've had to do so. Well, I'm pleased about that. You couldn't expect me to be anything else, could you? But thanks are really due the other way round. It takes no particular courage to sit here rather than there. Doing that doesn't risk me, nor does sitting there risk most of the lawyers or inquiry staff. The bringing back to the surface of memories which may be too painful to be remembered. It doesn't involve me or counsel to the inquiry or any of the inquiry team having to reveal some of the most intimate details of our personal lives to total strangers, or to catalogue the indignities of trying to survive physically, mentally, and financially, both individually and often as a family after the death of someone we valued above all others. It is to me remarkable that so many, despite their mixed emotions, have wanted to give evidence, and that others whose story deserved to be heard orally have allowed themselves to be persuaded to tell it in that way, despite the personal cost that it might involve. In my view, true courage is shown when people have a choice between an easy option and a risky one, and they opt for the risky choice because that is the one which is most likely to help others, or allow them to do their duty by someone who is no longer here to do it for themselves. So I'd like to pay tribute to every one of those who've chosen to give evidence when asked, for they have shown that sort of courage. And each, in their own way, despite the risks of adding to their personal pain, has helped paint a composite picture which will help in trying to establish the truth. They have shone a light onto what has happened and the everyday consequences and ripple effects of living with it, often for 30 years or more. The inquiry is particularly interested in the overall picture. Each individual account given may be subtly different, one from another, but each is of value not just for its own sake, though it certainly is of value for that, but because taken together, they've painted the same themes from different perspectives. And now they've done that so clearly that you don't need me to recite those themes. Any observer can see them for themselves. They shape the context, what must follow. But let me just mention a couple of the emerging themes. First, it's clear that the impact of decisions made in the 1960s, 70s, and 80s, or the consequences of not making decisions which might have been made, continue to this day. And second, the evidence we heard only this week of a widow who became homeless after her husband's death, having had to spend the time caring for him when she might have spent it working for a wage if he had not been affected, is just part of an overall picture of relentless hardship for many. It's now just over a year ago since I wrote to the Minister for the Cabinet Office calling for decisive action to be taken to alleviate this, before any more fundamental review which might follow from the inquiry's conclusions. Some evidence we've heard suggests that the steps taken by the government so far, as a result of that letter, increasing payments in England, have helped, but many more witnesses have repeatedly drawn attention to the continuing variations between the home nations, although at the time of their infection there was no such thing as a devolved health administration. The grinding hardship of many is not put on hold while the inquiry continues. If, as a number of witnesses have argued, there is in truth no proper justification for the significant variations in financial support as between the nations of the UK, then there can be no proper reason for those variations to be perpetuated to await the outcome of the inquiry. I've learned today that this morning a government spokesman told the BBC this, and I quote, "We are working with devolved administrations so that we can meet our commitment to guarantee equal support for all those infected and affected across the UK." Now I note, perhaps it's the lawyer in me, but I note the wording. The wording is not "we will consider." It is not "we wish." It is not "we want." It is "we commit." Our commitment to guarantee equal support. Those are the words which the government has issued today. We are independent of the government. We note those words. We wait to see what happens in consequence. As to the outcomes of the inquiry, may I make it clear that if wrong was done, I have the power under the Inquiries Act to say so. And if it was, I will. If there is criticism to be made, I shall make it. And I shall not hesitate to name names where it is appropriate. If there was fault, I intend to say so. And where actions should be taken in remedy, I expect to make robust recommendations. This is not the same as determining liability in a civil or criminal case. I have no power to do that. That is a matter for the courts. Whether my findings at the end of the day lead others to take matters before those courts is for them, not for me to determine. Another repeated theme has been the often unanswered call for help and psychological support for those suddenly facing what has seemed an unfair death sentence, with all its side effects on partners, friends, and family, or the grueling courses of treatment they have undergone with their own side effects. It is appropriate, therefore, that when we begin our next set of hearings, which will begin on February the 23rd next year, we shall hear in particular from experts on social and psychological impact. One was here earlier today, as well as from experts on hepatitis, HIV, blood and bleeding disorders. That evidence is intended to place what we have already heard in a wider context and prepare for the hearings with the decision makers which will follow. They will follow in early June. The exact date depends on timetabling the first witnesses, but we shall begin by exploring what those clinicians, and for that matter those other witnesses, who can shed lights on the policies and practices of centres from across the UK who were most closely involved at the time, can tell us about what happened and why. Well, you may ask, why wait till next June? Time is precious. Aren't you wasting it? The answer is that we are taking time for good reason and wasting none of it. This inquiry is not a small undertaking. The hearings are the visible part of the inquiry's work, but the majority of the inquiry team have been beavering away throughout on the investigation. And this will intensify to enable Ms. Richards and her counsel team to be fully prepared to examine what the decision makers have to say from June onwards. More than 11.5 million documents have been reviewed, and around 2.5 million pages already placed on the inquiry's document system, a figure which grows at an average of 40,000 pages per week. These come from almost 600 organizations, repositories, archives, including international archives, trusts and haemophilia centres and government bodies. I have to confess that more documents have come to light than I had at first anticipated. And each page of each document has to be looked at. They have to be set in the right place. It feels at times like solving a million-piece jigsaw. We've had extensive cooperation from most of those bodies, individuals, companies and organizations which hold documents, and I thank them for that. So I hope that I'm not going to be misinterpreted when I gently remind all of the expectation expressed at the highest levels of government that there will be full cooperation with this inquiry, and that having regard to the public interest in establishing the truth, that extends to waiving legal privilege, ensuring retention notices are in place so that potentially relevant information is not destroyed, and ensuring or facilitating thorough searches of archives. All this and evidence of around 3,000 witnesses to be considered, along with expert evidence. We shall also be arranging for further evidence from people who are infected or affected to be heard at the end of our evidence sessions, as I promised at the outset, people first and last. And we may find space, too, for some to be heard during our exploration of specific terms of reference. Having mentioned that, forgive me for repeating a theme which I've touched on at the end of each set of hearings so far. You've seen today, you've seen throughout this week, you've seen over the last 12 weeks of hearings, how the evidence of each witness adds something new, something different to the overall picture. Just when you may think you've heard it all, another aspect is revealed. Written statements are the same. Each has a real value. Each sheds a slightly different light. Each time I've asked for anyone who's been infected or has been affected by the suffering of someone close to them or themselves to pluck up the courage. It takes courage, I acknowledge, to make a statement. There has been a response. Well, I'm asking again, and I'm especially interested in what those with a blood disorder such as thalassemia or sickle cell anemia may have to add. Well, it's late in the day, but then I did promise we'd sit till we finished. It remains for me just to mention two further things. First, I feel sure that the witnesses who've been dealing with the most uncomfortable of issues have been able to do so much better because so many of you have been here supporting them, here and online. And finally, it remains for me to wish you all here, a safe journey home. Thank you. _23rd of February.